Hello, everybody. Until quite recent times, maybe till about 100 years ago or so, it was universally assumed that the decline and fall of Rome was caused by the decadence of the Roman ruling classes or Roman society in general. And this assumption wasn't just due to Christian moralizing. Um, the word decadence presupposes acting out of self-interest, corruption. Moral corruption. Healthy societies are ones in which there's an active sense of civic responsibility, coupled with a willingness to sacrifice one's own interests or even one's own life for that society or that nation. Nationalism, to some degree, is a manifestation of this, as is adherence to a religious faith. In a decadent society, by contrast, this sense of civic responsibility and duty is lacking. In a decadent society, everyone acts entirely or almost entirely out of economic or other kinds of self-interest. Now, whatever we might say of early Rome, Republican Rome, there's no question that it possessed a healthy sense of civic responsibility, a willingness on the part of its citizens to sacrifice themselves for the common good. This mentality gradually disappeared during the time of the empire, as wealthy and middle-class Romans began to enjoy the money and privilege which their ancestors had bequeathed to them by their courage and self-sacrifice and work. Imperial Rome was the society that gave us the vomitorium, where party-going Romans went to empty their bowels of food and drink so that they could resume eating and drinking. One of the most damaging aspects of Roman decadence was an unwillingness to have children. Children are notoriously get in the way of the partying lifestyle, don't they? The refusal of Roman families to have children, beginning with wealthy Roman families and then spreading to the middle classes and eventually even the poor, this was noted and lamented by almost every major Roman author. Men such as Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny, Dio Cassius, etc. In an age before reliable contraceptives, the only two ways to avoid having children, of course, was through abortion and infanticide. And both these were widely practiced by the Romans. With infanticide, of course, the preferred option, as it was safer for the mother. Successive Roman administrations tried to discourage this practice, but without much success, or without any success even. Several of the Roman authors record that a single child was all most families were willing to have or to raise. And this was usually a boy. Why? Why was this the case? Well, economic self-interest. A girl required a large dowry when she was getting married, if she wanted to be married into a good family. Boys, on the other hand, were the recipients of the dowry. So the targeting of girls for infanticide will place any society after a while on the edge of a demographic abyss. Females are far more important to a society's demographic health than are males. As an illustration of this, consider if 100 women and one man were stranded on a desert island. A generation later, there maybe be 500 or 600 people on that island. Whereas if one woman with 100 men were stranded in a desert island, a generation later, there might be only 5 or 6 people left alive. So in targeting girls for infanticide, Roman families were creating a dangerous imbalance and placing the empire on the edge of a demographic precipice. Rome was pushed over the edge of that precipice in the middle of the 3rd century, when a devastating plague swept throughout the Mediterranean world. This plague, known as the Plague of Cyprian because St. Cyprian described it in some detail, worked its way throughout the empire between roughly 249 and 262 AD. It's not clear how many people died during this catastrophe, though one source tells us that 5,000 people in Rome in the city of Rome alone were dying every day. The bubonic plague, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, is estimated to have killed 2/3 of the population of Europe. So that gives us some idea of the impact that the plague of Cyprian may have had. Now, we don't know exactly what kind of virus or epidemic this was, but there are various theories that it could have been an early version of the bubonic plague or typhoid or something like that. Now, Europe recovered from the bubonic plague. Well, it took Europe about 200 years to recover in terms of population from the bubonic plague. But Rome didn't. Rome began a terminal decline in terms of population. This has been demonstrated over the past 50 or 60 years by archaeology. Excavation of Roman cities invariably reveals growth and expansion until the middle of the 2nd century. Then there's a kind of equilibrium until the middle of the 3rd century, at which point there begins a rapid decline. Cities get smaller and settlements get fewer. And this continues into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. In fact, from the middle of the 3rd century, archaeologists have found clear evidence of a population decline which continues in the Western Empire, at least, until the Middle Ages. Things are somewhat different in the eastern part of the empire, where the population decline of the 3rd century is arrested, in fact, in the 4th century and reversed by the 5th century. By the 6th century, the Eastern Empire, the eastern part of the Roman Empire, was experiencing a kind of golden age with massive expansion of population and wealth and cities. Why the difference between East and West? Why did the Eastern Empire expand, whereas the Western Empire went into terminal decline? The answer to this, I would suggest, lies in the spread of Christianity. The only group in the Roman Empire which did not practice infanticide or abortion were the Christians. This group, and this group alone, registered a demographic increase during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Indeed, it was probably for that reason that Constantine legalized Christianity early in the 4th century, in the hope, in other words, of reversing Rome's demographic decline. But in spite of this legalization, Christianity remained very much a minority religion in the West. Indeed, Italy, Gaul, and Spain were not fully Christianized until the 6th century. By contrast, the eastern provinces of the empire were Christianized much earlier, being as they were much closer to the Christian heartland. Syria and Armenia were probably majority Christian societies by the mid-3rd century. When the plague struck here, there were far more females of childbearing age to replace the casualties. In the West, where females were formed an unnaturally small proportion of the population, recovery from the effects of the plague would have been much slower, even if the Romans had at that moment ended the custom of infanticide. But there is no evidence that they did. All the evidence, on the contrary, indicates that the pernicious custom of killing babies continued in the West until the spread of Christianity finally stopped it in the 6th century. And that, as a result, the Roman world entered a devastating demographic winter from which Roman civilization did not recover. All of this has been known to academics for decades and has been swept under the carpet by historians, blinded by political correctness. So instead of the glaringly obvious, we're given theories, various economic theories and proposals as to the reason for Rome's decline. Some people talk about taxation, inflation, etc. Now, the modern West, this is an important topic because the modern West is going through its own age of decadence. We live in a hedonistic society, which has, in fact, many parallels, displays many parallels with ancient Rome. So we would do well to learn the lessons of the past, of the Roman past, before it's too late. As I said, the western part of the Roman Empire did not recover demographically from the catastrophe of the plague of Cyprian because of the Roman custom of killing most of their children. By the 6th century, as I say, Christianity had finally become the majority faith of the Western provinces, and there was at that stage a reversal of the population decline.
Yeah, now you time put the chair and stuff outside for me.